Hi everyone. Today we're going to be covering the cases of 5 Jane and John Does in Quebec, Canada. The first of which is going to be the Sainte-Mélanie John Doe. The Sainte-Mélanie John Doe was found on May 5th, 2003 in Sainte-Mélanie, Quebec, Canada. The remains were skeletonized. Investigators estimate the remains were at the site of discovery for several months. The time since death was estimated to be sometime towards the later half of 2002. The cause of death was homicide by multiple gunshot wounds to the head. The Sainte-Mélanie John Doe was a black male who was estimated to have been between 30 to 35 years old. He's estimated to have stood between 5'2" and 5'8". Investigators were unable to determine his weight, but they stated that he had a medium build. The Sainte-Mélanie John Doe also had a noticeable gap between his 2 front teeth. Designer clothing was located beside the Sainte-Mélanie John Doe's remains, including a blue and red Tommy Hilfiger jacket, lined black shorts, a shoe only manufactured in New York, and a belt. A car key for a Honda Civic or an Acura from the 1980s was also located beside the remains. The Sainte-Mélanie John Doe's remains were located near a field close to the Sainte Beatrix Way in Sainte-Mélanie, Quebec. If you have any information about this case, please contact local law enforcement. Next case I'm going to be discussing is that of the Gatineau John Doe. The Gatineau John Doe's skeletal remains were found along a riverbank on September 11, 2011 in Gatineau, Quebec, Canada. The remains were the bones of a right foot. The time since death and the cause of death were unable to be determined, presumably due to the fact that only partial remains were recovered. The Gatineau John Doe was a male of an unknown race who's estimated to have been somewhere between 20 to 80 years old. He's estimated to have stood between 5'4" and 6 foot. Investigators were unable to determine his weight, eye, or hair color. The Gatineau John Doe was found wearing a sock and a black leather Penman shoe in size 10. If you have any information about this case, please contact local law enforcement. The next case I'm going to be discussing is that of the Laval Jane Doe. The Laval Jane Doe was found on October 5th, 2014 in the St. François district of Laval, Quebec, Canada. The condition of the remains is listed as unknown. The time since death is unknown as well. The cause of death has not been stated. The Laval Jane Doe was a black female with a dark complexion who's estimated to have been between 25 to 35 years old. She's estimated to have stood at 5 foot 5 inches tall and had a medium build. She's estimated to have been between 134 and 137 pounds. Investigators could not determine her eye color, but they were able to observe that the Laval Jane Doe had short black hair. Her teeth were in good condition and were described as healthy. It's reported that she had an African symbol tattooed on her left wrist. However, I believe it's more decorative and looks like 2 hearts or a butterfly. If you have any information about this case, please contact local law enforcement. The Laval Jane Doe was discovered near the bank of the River of the Prairies, which is less than a 10-minute drive from the location that the remains of the Montreal Jane Doe were discovered 2 years earlier. I'll be discussing the case of the Montreal Jane Doe next. It's possible that their murders are linked. The Laval and Montreal Jane Does might have been acquainted or ran with the same crowd. The Does might have both been sex workers in the area. Sex workers, particularly those engaging in street prostitution, are sometimes targeted by serial killers who may consider them easy targets and less likely to be missed, or who use the stigma associated with sex work as a justification for murder. According to the Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics, between 1991 and 2014, there were 294 homicides of sex workers. 96% of these victims were female sex workers. 34% of these homicides remain unsolved, compared to 20% for homicides where the victim was not a sex worker. The Does might have also been victims of the same predator or serial murderer. As I said, we are now going to be covering the case of the Montreal Jane Doe. The Montreal Jane Doe was found on July 18, 2012 in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. The remains were completely skeletonized. The time since death and the cause of death were unable to be determined, presumably due to the state of the remains. The Montreal Jane Doe was a white female who's estimated to have been between 16 to 20 years old. She's estimated to have stood between 5'4" and 5'11". Investigators were unable to determine her weight, eye, or hair color. The Montreal Jane Doe had at least 13 permanent teeth, and her dental records are available. If you have any information about this case, please contact local authorities. Finally, we're going to be discussing the case of the Cartierville John Doe. The Cartierville John Doe was found on March 1, 1991 in Park Louisbourg in the Cartierville area of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. The box and garbage bags that held the human remains had been taken to a city dump when someone noticed blood and contacted police. There was no snow on the box, leading detectives to theorize it hadn't been there for long. The remains were not recognizable due to the traumatic injuries John Doe had sustained. The time since death is listed as, quote, recent, unquote, at the time the remains were discovered. The cause of death was homicide by stabbing. The Cartierville John Doe was a white male with a fair complexion who's estimated to have been between 30 to 49 years old. He's estimated to have stood between 5'2" and 5'3" and weighed anywhere between 99 and 117 pounds with a slender build. Investigators were unable to determine his eye color, but they were able to determine that his hair color was brown. Also, his beard hair grew in an odd circular pattern, and he had a grayish-colored mustache. Authorities described him as being, quote, very hairy, unquote, and his teeth were in good condition. He had a vaccination scar on his right arm near his shoulder, and he was uncircumcised. The only items found with the Cartierville John Doe were the box and garbage bags that contained his remains. Otherwise, he was completely naked. John Doe's hands had been cut off, probably to prevent identification through fingerprints, and he had been stabbed 127 times in various parts of his body, including his face and genitals, leaving him completely disfigured. The extensive damage inflicted on him, particularly the mutilated genitals, indicates a crime of passion. However, investigators haven't ruled out the possibility that the killing was a settling of accounts by organized crime. If you have any information about this case, please contact local law enforcement. If you have any information that can help authorities identify any of the Jane or John Does discussed in this video, I urge you to come forward to help their families reclaim them and put them to rest. Thank you for watching.